It's finally happening. I'm finally testing 7 of the most popular ultra high performance all season tyres on the market. If you're watching this, you probably know exactly what an ultra high performance all season tyre is, but let me bring you up to speed just in case. An ultra high performance all season tyre is a tyre that's designed to be used year round in milder winter climates. They're not going to be as good as an all weather or a winter tyre in snow and ice, but they should offer better performance below 40 Fahrenheit or about 7 degrees centigrade in these colder conditions where a summer tyre's rubber starts to really harden up and the performance drops off. All while not feeling like jelly mess when on a summer's day in the blazing heat, you're trying to do an epic canyon drive in your sporty car and you're not left crying because you've got an all season tyre on. These are meant to blend that cold weather performance that you need in colder climates with some summer enjoyment that you really want from a summer tyre.
On test is the brand new Michelin Pilot Sport All Season 4, the Bridgestone Potenza RE980 AS, the Continental ExtremeContact DW06, the Goodyear Eagle Exhilarate, the Cooper Zeon RS3 G1, the Kumho Ecsta PA51 and the Fuzion UHP Sport AS.
To find out which of these 7 tyres are the best, Goodyear have kindly lent me their massive test facility in San Angelo, Texas, where I get to run my own program to test them in the dry, the wet, comfort and noise, and really dig into not only the ultimate lap time, but how they feel and how sporty they are in handling, because I think that's really important for this category of tyre too. As always, I will be testing blind, meaning I don't know what tyre I'm driving on when I'm testing to remove any biases. The test car is this really red BMW 4 Series, and the test size is 245/40/18. Which of these 7 sets of tyres is going to be best? One way to find out. Let's go get testing. The dry handling course at Goodyear's test facility in San Angelo might be short, but it isn't half mighty for testing the tyre's ability to take high speed and low speed corners and braking, and it even has a cone slalom area like this. And I've not used cones for dry testing in a long time, but I actually really like it because it tells you a lot about the car's lane change ability and transient behavior that you might not ordinarily get. But I've just decided I'm not going to run that cone again because the last thing you want to see is me wobbling side to side while I'm trying to tell you about all the tyres. Now, the slowest tyre on test, unsurprisingly, is the cheapest. It was the Fuzion. This tyre felt more like a comfort tyre. It didn't really feel like an ultra high performance tyre in any way particularly. It picked up understeer early and then just pushed and pushed and pushed. The ultimate level of grip was fairly low and the tyre just didn't really do what you wanted it to do. It wasn't a disaster, but it certainly wasn't what you'd call an ultra high performance tyre or a tyre you'd want to put on a sports car you want to enjoy, because it just didn't like being sporty. And I'm doing the chicane again. I enjoy it that much I forgot I'm not doing it. And it didn't really like getting hot. So after about the first half lap, it all got a bit jelly. Next up was the Cooper. Now I think at regular road speeds, this tyre would feel quite nice, because on the way to the track, I was like, you know what, this tyre has potential. But like the Fuzion, half a lap in, and everything was going wrong. It was picking up understeer, it was getting too hot, it was getting a bit vague, and although the grip level was a little bit higher, it still was well below what you'd expect from an ultra high performance all season tyre and the best tyres in this test. So I guess this might feel okay at road speeds, but on track or pushing hard, no thank you. 5th place was the Continental. Now, I was surprised at this when I was going through the data after doing all the testing, because we only know them by set numbers. This was set number 5. I was surprised this was so far down the order, both in objective time and subjectively, because everything I've seen about the Continental online is a good handling tyre, a good sports tyre, a good sports all season tyre. But again, this is another one that felt better on the way to track than it did when you started pushing on. The steering was quite light. It was a little bit more direct than the previous 2 tyres, but as you really dug into the grip of the tyre, it was just getting slower and slower as it got hotter and hotter, and then it got harder and harder to drive. So during my favourite slalom, the cone slalom, you'd have the back end coming out and trying to overtake the front end, and it was just a little bit of a non-sporty package. It really didn't like going fast, but maybe that's going to be offsetting the wet performance of the tyre, because often you find that is a performance trade-off. You get better wet performance at the expense of some dry handling or ultimate dry grip. 4th place was the Kumho. Now this was probably the first of the tyres that felt like it was getting sporty, and I started to enjoy driving this BMW 4 Series. It did pick up understeer, and at points it picked up surprise understeer, which technically is the worst kind of understeer. The understeer you don't expect to be coming, and then all of a sudden it's coming and you're trying to back off and really bring the front tyres back into line. But the grip level started to get higher again than the bottom 4 tyres, and it was a more manageable package. As I've said with the other tyres, I'd just like a little bit more detail through the front axle with the Kumho, telling me what's going on and what's about to happen, so I don't have to react to it. I can be proactive when driving. Third place was the Bridgestone. Now, on the way to the track, I was like, oh, this is going to be a nice tyre. I thought this might actually be my favourite of the bunch because it just felt solid on the sidewall. It felt like it was turning nice and quick. However, strangely, when you actually got to the limit of grip, the tyre just didn't tell you. The limit of grip was higher and the braking felt like another step ahead. So we're starting to get to the top 3, where they're kind of like a category above the bottom 4, and they're starting to feel like an ultra high performance tyre, which is great. And the Bridgestone had the grip, but I didn't really like it information wise. The tyre would get to the limit and then you'd be understeering, and even at the back with a little bit of oversteer, the first you knew about it was your bum. You didn't feel it through the wheel, and you definitely didn't hear it through your ears, because weirdly it was the quietest tyre on test. No, that's an odd thing to say, but when the tyre's sliding in understeer and you can't hear that sound that you're so accustomed to from the other sets of tyres, I thought it was worth noting. Very good on the brakes overall, felt good steering wheel, so I think at road speeds this will be a really good fun tyre. It might sacrifice some comfort, but I think the limit driving, I'm not that fond of it, you know, but good grip otherwise. Second place went to the Michelin. Now this tyre felt like an absolute monster on the brakes. It was a step ahead of the Bridgestone again, and just really dug in. And there's a slow corner which is a sort of a braking down to a hairpin right, and you could just carry the brakes in way more than you could with any other tyre on the Michelin, and it would turn you and you'd be like, whoa, I'm turning. But it didn't feel quite as good laterally as it did on the brakes. Like the grip circle wasn't rounded, and again it just left you wanting perhaps a little bit more detail through the front axle. The steering is quite light on the Michelin, and as I've said in other tests, Michelin do seem to bias towards good braking and good levels of comfort rather than ultimate sporty feel, which I guess is perhaps what a lot of people want on the road. Like, you're appealing to the main mass audience, but for enthusiasts, as I'm sure you are, it's perhaps not the ideal solution to a tyre's development, and you can feel it when you're pushing on. Like, it's a really great tyre, really strong tyre, really fast, but you just want a little bit more through the steering wheel. And speaking of a little bit more through the steering wheel, the Goodyear was the fastest, and not by a huge amount, but it delivered it in a completely different way to the Michelin. It did not feel as good on the brakes as the Michelin, or even the Bridgestone potentially, but what it did feel was a way more rounded performance. And what I mean by that is laterally it was as strong as it was on the brakes, so you weren't stonking in on the brakes and then in the higher speed ones surprised that you have to feather it and you're sliding at the front. It was a really nice rounded package. And as with Goodyear tyres especially, this seems to be a running theme between Goodyear and Michelin recently. Goodyear seems to set their tyres up for slightly heavier, more detailed, more sporty steering feel, and it was a bit more of a joy to drive, and you could play with the car on the throttle and have a really good time. And I will show you, this slalom was so stable in the Goodyear compared to every other tyre on test, I could take it a gear higher. I was running pretty much every tyre in second, and the Goodyear I felt comfortable to run it in third, so that's a recommendation or a glowing endorsement of its stability. But with it feeling so different to the Michelin and the Bridgestone on the brakes, I wonder how it's going to do in the braking test. It should be a really interesting insight to the two different ways of developing a tyre, and whether the Michelin really does have that headline braking, short braking distance, and whether the Goodyear has maybe sacrificed some of that to get a more rounded level of performance, so you've got good lateral ability and a sporty handling tyre as well. So let's get on and do some braking.
As suspected, in an otherwise close group, Michelin had an advantage during the dry braking testing, stopping the car over half a metre shorter than the next best tyre. Next up, we move on to wet testing.
Wet handling. Now, I'm going to do my best to keep this really short for two reasons. One, I've already shot dry handling and I talked way too long in that, I'm sorry. And two, this is an autocross style wet handling course, so there are cones everywhere and I've already killed a number of them today. Sorry cones, and I'm going to try and avoid killing any more. The slowest tyre on test was again the Fuzion, but it was the most fun if you want to learn to drift. The tyres seem to want to switch between understeer and oversteer at will and allowed you to slide around. So if you find yourself in a really wet car park with cones everywhere, feel free to stick it on and learn how to control a car with understeer and oversteer at the same time, but perhaps not ideal for the road. The next tyre on test was the Kumho. Now this tyre was actually quite nice subjectively. Didn't give you any huge surprises, quite a bit of understeer, but it just didn't have the grip everywhere. And there's no point being really good subjectively if you don't have the grip. So that's how it ended up in 6th place. Next up was Cooper, closely followed by Michelin. Now the Cooper felt quite nice, like the Kumho, quite nice to test, but it just didn't have the grip. And then conversely, the Michelin felt like it had excellent grip, but it was just quite difficult to drive. I'm not sure if it was hydroplaning around here. There's not the biggest amount of water depth, but the Michelin would surprise you and you would struggle to be consistent. So over a single lap, if you're absolutely perfect, it could be relatively quick, but when you average out 3 laps, which is how we test, it ended up 4th overall. 3rd to 1st place was so close on time, there was almost nothing separating them. 3rd was Goodyear, and this was one of the most sporty feeling tyres, if not the most sporty feeling tyre again. Felt really good subjectively, it was good on the brakes, good handling, and good overall levels of grip to get us to 3rd. 2nd place was Bridgestone, which wasn't quite as sporty feeling, but it was a really easy tyre to drive consistently. There was absolutely no issues with hydroplaning. It was good grip all round. It was primary understeer, so it didn't really give you any surprises, and you could just hammer in laps, lap after lap, no problem with the Bridgestone. And not the most fun, not the most sporty, but it was good levels of grip. And then finally, it was the Continental. So maybe that offset in dry was paid back in wet. Quickest tyre by a very small margin, but subjectively, again, it felt more like a comfort bias tyre than a performance bias tyre. But when you're talking about lap times, you can't get away from the fact it was the fastest tyre, so good job Continental.
Wet braking was even closer than dry. Michelin kept its advantage, tying 1st place with Cooper, with Kumho and Fuzion backing up the pack. Next, we look at the comfort and noise levels of the tyres.
So, to test the tyre's comfort and noise levels, we ran smooth concrete, rough surfaces, impact strips, and a kind of potholey broken concrete. And it really worked out the tyres and gave us lots of different scenarios to work out which tyres were the most comfortable and which tyres had the best noise suppression. In last place was the Bridgestone. It was both the least comfortable and probably one of the noisiest, with a really weird sort of pitch noise. It wasn't massively different from the best on test, but it was noticeable, so that's why it finished last. Next up was the Kumho in terms of comfort. Like the Bridgestone, it felt like a stiff tyre and didn't round off any of the bigger bumps, but it was pretty good with noise. In fact, it had the lowest noise on test, which shows you this juxtaposition you sometimes get through comfort and noise. Up next was the Fuzion. It wasn't outstanding, but it did round off some of the bigger bumps a little bit better than the Bridgestone and Kumho, but it didn't really isolate you from any of the smaller road imperfections either, so it wasn't the best on test, and average noise. Michelin finished 4th. It was pretty good with noise, but it felt kind of square over the bigger bumps, and it struggled more with noise on the coarse surface, but it was pretty good on the smooth. Goodyear and Conti felt very similar in 3rd and 2nd, or joint 2nd. They both started rounding off the bumps a bit better, and the Goodyear was slightly better with noise. The Cooper was the most comfortable tyre on test, rounding off the big bumps the best, and it had relatively no levels of noise, so congratulations on Cooper. If you're firmly intended on getting the most comfortable ultra high performance all season tyre, well, don't buy an ultra high performance tyre, but if you do, it's the Cooper. Test complete, and boy, it was another close one. There's a shock. They always seem to be super close these days. To get the final order of results, as I've explained in other tests, you can't just finish the test and decide which one you like at a whim. You have to go through all the data. And because each section of data has a different spread, you then have to apply weighting to it. So for this test, I've done a traditional-ish type of score weighting, but I've applied a little bit more weight to handling because this is a UHP tyre test and they should handle well. It's one of the key criteria. In 7th and 6th places were the 2 cheapest tyres on test, unsurprisingly. Now, the Fuzion had an uphill battle from the start, being the cheapest by quite a margin. But it showed in its performance. It was last in every measurable test, and subjectively it wasn't great either. It wasn't a disaster for the cheapest tyre on test, but when you compare it to the rest of the tyres, the quality of grip just wasn't there. Sixth place was the Kumho. Like the Fuzion, it just really struggled in the wet, but subjectively, it wasn't that bad a tyre to drive on. It was quite enjoyable. It just didn't have the grip, which meant it couldn't finish any higher. The next group of tyres was this pair, the Continental and Cooper, the Cs. Now, both these tyres had very similar characteristics in that they were both quite nice, comfortable tyres to be, and they both did really well in the wet, but both of them struggled in the dry, the Continental a little bit more. They just felt a little bit inert and a little bit numb to the steering, which isn't what you want from an ultra high performance tyre, but you can't take away their wet grip and their comfort. In fact, it goes to show again that interesting balance tyre manufacturers sometimes have to make between offsetting wet grip against dry grip or comfort against handling, because both these tyres were comfortable, but both these tyres struggled with the subjective handling, neither of them feeling particularly sporty. And the top three tyres, again, in a group of their own and very close. It was Bridgestone in third, Goodyear in second, and Michelin in first. The Bridgestone in third place was a tyre that had good grip in both the dry and wet, and it felt sporty right up until the limit where you just lost a little bit of detail through the steering wheel and you kind of were left guessing as what the tyre was up to. It was also the least comfortable tyre in test and one of the noisiest, and if you handle it, you'll see why. This thing almost feels like a run flat. It's by far the strongest feeling tyre in test and probably the heaviest. So that's the offset. If you want that quick, direct steering, you give up some of that comfort, apparently. It's just a really old school, solid tyre. Second place went to the excellent Goodyear Eagle Exhilarate. Now this tyre was one of the most rounded during the dry handling lap, offering what felt like a really balanced performance between traction, braking and lateral grip. And it was one of the most sporty feeling tyres on test, which was excellent. This carried over to the wet, where the tyre had good levels of grip, good handling. It was also quiet and comfortable, so a very good all-round tyre. It's also cheaper than these two to buy. Its only negative was a really average dry braking result, which stopped it winning this test overall. And speaking of winning the test, it was this, none other than the Michelin Pilot Sport All Season 4. This new tyre from Michelin might not have been the most sporty handling in the dry, and it was even a little bit tricky in the wet, but you couldn't take away its raw grip advantage. It absolutely dominated dry braking, was good in the wet, reasonable levels of comfort, a very good tyre from the French manufacturer again, as we've grown to expect from Michelin, but its negative point is the thing we've also grown to expect from Michelin. It was the most expensive tyre on test. But any of these top three tyres, you'll be very happy with. The next two down, the Cooper and Continental, if you're looking for a more comfort bias, ultra high performance all season tyre, they're also excellent buys. So any of the top five tyres, you'll be very happy with. These three especially, and I think if you probably want the most sporty ultra high performance all season tyre, from this test, it's this, the Exhilarate. But the Bridgestone and Michelin are very good choices too. If you want to dig through the data from this test further, head over to Tyre Review's website. There'll be a link in the description where all the data and commentary is on there, so you can really pour through the data. If you've got any experiences with your own tyres, head over to the Tyre Review's website again, and you'll be able to leave your review for millions of other tyre shoppers to buy. I know I haven't tested in snow this time, and it's something I'd like to do, so if you want to see that, leave a comment below. These tyres aren't meant to excel in snow, and due to travel constraints, due to life that is at the moment, I couldn't get to do any snow testing, but hopefully it's something I'll get to do in the future. A huge thanks once again to Goodyear for lending me their facility and helping support this test and allowing me to run the test on my own, in my own way. Without big tyre manufacturers supporting independent testing, it would just be impossible to do this level of testing. So huge respect to Goodyear, and their place in San Angelo is amazing. A huge thank you to Goodyear. Any questions, ask below. If you've enjoyed it, thumbs up, hit subscribe, and as always, safe motoring.
All right, just killing a bit of time while I'm waiting to shoot an intro because it's started raining in Texas. Thank you, Texas. Sidewall test, which I know you all love. It doesn't really translate to a lot, but it's interesting nonetheless. Michelin, fairly stiff. Good on tread cap, good on the apex. That's a nice amount of stiffness. This would be the Bridgestone. Oh, blimey. This is a typical Bridgestone. This is really solid on the sidewall. Kind of feels like a run flat. That's strong. Continental, a little bit softer than the Michelin. A little bit squishier on the tread cap. Yeah, that's quite a soft tyre. Goodyear, very stiff on the apex here, but quite forgiving here. And but quite strong on the tread cap actually. So that's an interesting blend. I've seen Michelin do that with some of their later tyres. This would be the Cooper. You're probably around the Conti levels. Yeah, very similar to the Conti, a little bit less than the Michelin. This is the Kumho. Ooh, yeah, that's up there with the Bridgestone. That's a strong sidewall tyre. Oh, that's a strong boy, that one. And then the Fuzion, kind of along the lines of the Cooper, but yeah, very soft on the tread cap. Feels light. About weight, that's heavy, that's the Cooper. That's very light, that's the Goodyear. That's good for rolling resistance. Conti's very light as well. Bridgestone, as you would expect, weighs a chunk. And the Michelin's are sort of in between. I'll put them on the scales if I haven't already.